Thank you for the honor of reporting on the global energy revolution that is taking us to a cheaper, cleaner, resilient, and climate safer future. The world has just had two big energy shocks in 5 years, Putin's war in Ukraine and then Trump's war with Iran. Maybe they'll merge. As Kingsmill Bond says, one shock gives you pause, a twin shock gives you wisdom. And Michael Liebreich knows that in the past 60 years, we've actually had 14 oil price shocks, 8 of them big. But this time is different because unlike the twin energy shocks in the 1970s, when we had no quick alternative to belt tightening, we now have better, faster, cheaper, and scalable non-fossil alternatives. Britain's Climate Change Committee calculates that just one more fossil fuel shock would cost more than eliminating fossil fuels by 2050. And indeed, I'll suggest that that doesn't cost extra, it costs less. So this time, many countries, rather than renaming the problem by just importing fossil fuels from somewhere else, are choosing four fundamental shifts from fossil fuels to renewables, fuels to electricity, inefficient to efficient use, and centralized to distributed supply. Together, more efficient use in blue at the top, renewable supply in aqua near the bottom, and electrification of heat and mobility, the middle wedge in dark green, are squeezing out the fossil fuels in gray. Those fuels, 86% of total energy supply last year, is as misleading a guide to the future as was, say, the number of horses in 1900.
Is that
just
him?
cars displaced them. Sorry, what?
I think someone just forgot to unmute themselves. You're good.
Okay. 3/4 of people live in a country that imports more energy than it exports. And the 22% of total energy that is net imported is vulnerable to shocks. The tipping point for this transformation is neither in past history nor in future mystery. It is right now. The world's total use of fossil fuels paused around 2019 and began bumping along a plateau with minor excursions both ways due to weather or war. But last year, renewable energy saved $480 billion worth of fossil fuels and grew 10%, more than any other supply. Around this year, the trend of the previous 2 centuries is reversing as carbon-free electricity begins to meet all demand growth and then more, tipping fossil fuels into steepening decline before 2030, probably well before. In the US, every sector has already passed peak fossil fuel. In coal-intensive China and India, fossil-fueled electric generation actually fell last year. The left-hand chart shows how fossil fuel industries project their continued dominance in total energy supply, without mentioning that about 2/3 is wasted before it even reaches the customers. The second graph, focused on climate, shows paths for emitting less carbon by phasing out fossil fuels. The third graph shows how, by shifting from fossil fuels in red to renewable electricity in green. Then using energy even more efficiently, the fourth graph saves more fossil fuels sooner with less renewable power. And that is my story for today. This vision is quickly gaining favor because efficiency of renewables are not only cheaper, cleaner, safer, fairer, faster than fossil fuels, they also provide energy security and sovereignty without trade-off or compromise. This is most obvious in Asia, which used 4/5 of the oil and gas flowing through the Strait of Hormuz and was hardest hit by its closure. So Asia is abandoning the fossil fuel growth that it was projected to drive. Now efficiency and renewables can meet the goals of affordable and stable prices, reliable and equitable supply, and public health and safety simultaneously for all and forever, because every 5 days the Earth receives more solar energy than the total known reserves of all fossil fuels. So capturing just a tiny fraction of that natural flow can meet all human needs. Traditional energy changes are linear, but today's revolution is exponential. Here's the global growth since 2010 in generation by solar in orange, wind in aqua, plus the installed fleets of electric vehicles in dark blue and battery storage in dark red. Just last year, the world's solar generation grew 30% and battery storage 66%, 82% in China. This new normal needs an agile mindset because it's hard to catch an exponential curve from behind. Defying a federal blockade on renewables, the U.S. shares in this rapid growth, but it dominates old energy industries, not new ones. America is not the technological epicenter of clean energy as it was for the internet. For now, that clean energy epicenter is China, where far-sighted policies have built about half the world's renewable energy and even more of many supply chains. The U.S. is starting to catch up, but from far behind, and despite perverse national policy. Most of the world's solar power is now in emerging markets, and two-thirds of those countries are deploying it faster than the U.S. is. China, Europe, and others resolutely pursue consistent long-run strategies and will gladly grab any market where the U.S. falters. By 2024, China was making more money exporting green technologies than the U.S. made exporting fossil fuels. America is a petrostate, extracting about as much oil as Saudi Arabia plus Russia, while China races to become the first major electrostate, a surer destination. And as we'll see later, many developing countries are eagerly leapfrogging over the rest of the fossil fuel era to get reliable energy faster at lower and stable prices. Australia shows how these trends can converge. In the past decade, strong solar and wind power growth cut coal power by 2/5 and raised the nation's renewable power share from 14% to 40%. Rooftop solar costs most Australians just 5 US cents a kilowatt hour, several-fold less than grid power, or than the US rooftop solar price. Batteries are booming, and in just 1 year in the national electricity market, that's 80% of the Australian total, they helped cut the evening peak electricity prices in half in 1 year by substituting midday solar power for costlier gas. It's quite an exciting story. Worldwide, renewable electricity generation in green has zoomed past nuclear in magenta, gas in blue, and now coal in white. Solar output alone passed nuclear output April 24 and added 8 billion watts, a gigawatt of capacity every 12 hours. Last year, the world added over twice as much solar and wind capacity as it had nuclear capacity built over 56 years. This year, solar will outgenerate nuclear. Modern renewables now look set to add more generation in 5 years than in the past century. And they've shifted energy economics fundamentally from fuel extraction, the more you dig, the more it costs, so you buy less, to equipment manufacturing. So the more you build, the less it costs, so you buy more. Those cost curves have now crossed, triggering the green curve's exponential growth. As Tom Friedman said, the more we buy, the cheaper it gets, so we buy more, so it gets cheaper. Important feedback. Thus, electricity's renewable share is set to double from 1/3 to at least 2/3 by mid-century. And the most formidable competitor isn't even shown in this graph. It's efficient use that brings more work from our energy. Bloomberg New Energy Finance, the source of this graph, leads in tracking the supply-side transition, but it doesn't yet comparably analyze efficient use. So very little of that is in this graph. But in the 50 years through 2025, saved energy, about 2/3 due to smarter technologies, dropped U.S. energy use by 65% with immense cumulative savings. Renewables, meanwhile, tripled, but with 27 times less cumulative output or impact. So who knew that? Renewables get virtually all the headlines because they're visible, but energy is invisible, and the energy you don't use is almost unimaginable. Yet saved energy is half of the world's historic decarbonization and at least half of future decarbonization. So when we emit it, we're making the clean supply problem look twice as hard as it should be. Another bit of history. Around 1975, U.S. government and industry all said the total input energy needed to make $1 of real GDP could never drop. A year later, I heretically suggested it could drop 72% in the next 50 years. Well, as you just saw, it actually dropped 65%. Yet just the innovations already added by 2010 can save another threefold, twice what I originally thought, at 1/3 the real cost. And today that looks conservative because optimizing buildings, vehicles, factories, equipment as whole systems, not as piles of little isolated parts, can often make very big energy savings cost less than small or no savings turning diminishing returns into increasing returns. Vigorously applied, such integrative design could quintuple global energy productivity by around 2060 or triple it by around 2040, as documented in this foundational paper. I'll give examples shortly, but this is only end-use efficiency, services per unit of final energy delivered to the user, like electricity or gasoline. That does not include the 2- or 3-fold upstream savings from electrification with primary renewables. And those two kinds of savings multiply, squeezing out fossil fuels even faster. Here's how. 3 columns starting on the left illustrate this supply side shift. At the upper left, thermal power stations' huge conversion losses in red vanish at the lower left when solar and wind power in green generate directly without a steam cycle. In the middle column, fuel combustion at the top provides heat about 4-fold less efficiently than at the bottom, a renewably powered heat pump concentrating free low temperature heat. And in the right column, at the top, gasoline and diesel engines, with their big losses in red, are 2 to 4 times less efficient than renewably powered electric motors at the bottom in battery electric vehicles. So the systems across the bottom row, replacing fossil fuels with renewable electricity, are several-fold more efficient in turning renewable electricity into delivered services. But this does not yet include higher efficiency in the equipment being powered, or the building being heated, or the vehicle being moved. First, doing that end-use efficiency makes the heat pumps and EV batteries smaller, cheaper, less mineral intensive. Both kinds of efficiency multiply to form primary energy efficiency. And the supply side savings of around 2- or 3-fold avoid nearly $5 trillion of global waste each year, almost 5% of world GDP. And yet they're only half as important as the largely overlooked gains in end-use efficiency. So let me illustrate those next. The world agreed in Glasgow to double the speed of saving energy overall, but that's before including integrative design. Yet that could make the end-use efficiency resource several-fold bigger and actually cost less, because it uses not more but fewer devices, and not fancier but simpler devices, more artfully chosen, combined, timed, and sequenced. We're familiar with resources like copper ore bodies and oil reservoirs, finite and depletable assemblages of atoms. In contrast, energy efficiency resources are infinitely expandable assemblages of ideas, depleting only stupidity, a very abundant resource. A few examples. My wife Judy and I live 7,100 feet up in the Rocky Mountains near Aspen, in the building you might see a little of behind me, where temperatures used to dip as low as minus 47 F. The central atrium behind me, seen here in a February snowstorm, has so far produced 84 passive solar banana crops with no heating system. It was cheaper to build that way 43 years ago because the extra cost of super efficiency was less than we saved up front by leaving out the heating system. Our house helped inspire several 100,000 European passive buildings with no heating and roughly normal construction cost. An analogy, in Bangkok saved 90% of the air conditioning energy with better comfort and normal construction cost. Nearly everyone on Earth lives in a climate between Bangkok and Old Snowmass. And wherever you live, integrative design gives many benefits from each expenditure. So the white arch behind me, or at the top of the upper middle slide or photo, has 12 different functions, but it has only one cost. Let's examine progress at office buildings by a series of green energy intensity numbers and yellow savings scores. RMI's integrative design to retrofit the Empire State Building initially saved 38% of its energy, later rising to 51%, with a 3-year payback, because smaller mechanical systems paid up front for most of the efficiency. Now the owner hopes to raise the savings to 80%. A major energy service company also offered a 3-year payback, but with disintegrated design, saving 6 times less than we'd saved. 3 years later, our cost-effective Denver retrofit saved 70%, making this half-century-old federal complex more efficient than what was then the best new U.S. office, which in turn is only a third as efficient as RMI's passive net positive no mechanicals office 10 minutes from here, using 1/9 the normal energy. And this Bavarian building uses 2/5 less energy than that. Yet these technologies all existed over a decade ago. What mainly improved is not so much technology as design, the way we apply technology. And both technology and design keep improving. The Dutch Sprong method of super outsolation, like adding a tea cozy around your house, can profitably retrofit many buildings to net zero efficiency, and installation can take as little as a day. Even in tropical climates, traditional passive building design can keep you feeling 29 to 34 Fahrenheit cheaper, while redesigning big mechanical space cooling systems can at least triple their efficiency, all with excellent economics. RMI's Global Cooling Prize just quintupled air conditioner efficiency, now heading to market from two major vendors. But a less noticed experiment 7 years ago revealed a startling alternative. Purely radiative cooling kept people comfortable outdoors in Singapore without moving, drying, or cooling the air, just with a very light breeze. Instead, in a shaded but open-ended pavilion, people stayed cool by radiating their bodies' far infrared rays into panels circulating slightly cooled water and shielded from the humid air by a thin plastic film. So water at 73 to 77 Fahrenheit can deliver comfort in air up to at least 90 Fahrenheit at 80% relative humidity. The water can often be cooled that little passively with no electricity, potentially about eliminating the world's long-term growth in peak electric demand. Inside buildings, this fist-sized heat pump can deliver 6 to 15 units of hot water per unit of electricity, while this electric conduction cooking system is 2 to 4.5 times more efficient than induction and otherwise superior, thanks partly to doubled efficiency vacuum insulated cookware that also works, as in this house, with induction cooktops. How about industry, which uses half the world's energy and electricity? Well, RMI's latest $60-odd billion worth of redesigns across many kinds of industries typically found about 30 to 60% energy savings on retrofit, paying back in a few years and far outperforming the orange zone in the upper left, where most energy service companies deliver disintegrated design. In new industrial projects, integrative design generally yielded about 40 to 90-odd% energy savings with lower than normal capital cost. For example, our redesign of this Texas Instruments semiconductor wafer fab used 40% less energy with 30% lower construction cost. So it was built in Texas, not China. By 2017, it had inspired cutting company-wide chip-making energy per chip by 62%, water intensity 56%, greenhouse gas intensity 57%. I didn't have quite time to paste in the latest data that just arrived. They're up in the 70s and 80s% as of last year. RMI's next wafer fab design after that one showed how to save about 2/3 of its energy use and half its capital cost while replacing all 22,000 tons of chillers with any of 3 natural cooling methods that can yield upwards of 100 units of cooling per unit of electricity. But many of the biggest industrial savings come from simply moving fluids more efficiently. Half the world's electricity, you see, turns motors, and half the motor torque turns pumps and fans. Just better pipe and duct design can save about 80 to 90% of the friction, and therefore the pumping power, 97% in this house. If everyone did this, it could save about half the world's coal-fired electricity, or a fifth of all electricity, and pay for itself typically in under a year in retrofit and instantly a new build. But that's not yet in any standard engineering textbook, official study, industry forecast, or climate model. Why not? Because it's not a technology. It's a design method. And few people yet think of design as a path to speed and scale. To wring out friction, we simply use big pipes and small pumps, not small pipes and big pumps. And we raise up the pump to meet the pipe rather than dipping the pipe down to meet a pump on the floor and then back up again. That eliminates 4 elbows, right angle bends, and their big friction. Then to eliminate the other elbows, we lay out the pipes first, then the equipment. So the 10 chillers, which started in a neat row, get staggered until the elbows go away. We lay out supply pipes as if they were drains. We bend mines, not pipes. Now think of the whole power and pumping system. From the fuel burned in the thermal power plant to the end use, many successive losses compound. So only a tenth of the energy in the fuel comes out the pipe as flow. But now turn those compounding losses around backwards from right to left, they become compounding savings. And every unit of flow or friction you save in the pipe saves 10 units of fuel cost, emissions, and global weirding at the power plant. And as you go back upstream, the components get smaller and cheaper, so the total capital cost goes down. Combine that with 35 improvements to the motor systems as you make them 5 or 10 times smaller, and you raise the potential savings from 1/5 to 1/3 of the world's electricity. That's an awfully big opportunity to be missing from all the forecasts and climate models. Now let's apply this same logic to big old data centers. 2/3 of the fuel fed into the power plant is lost in the plant and a bit in the grid. Half the metered electricity is lost in the cooling system and uninterruptible power supplies, together half the total capital cost, before it even gets to the servers. Then half the server energy doesn't reach the chips because it's lost in inefficient, usually very underloaded power supplies and lots of superfluous fans. Next comes severe underutilization of computing resources, partly through insufficient virtualization, so each app needs its own server. The resulting energy flow down at the bottom right is about to vanish, so let's magnify it first. Next comes bloatware, running many unnecessary threads and processes and making simple tasks very complex because compute cycles were cheaper than programmers' attention and someone else bought the electricity. Downstream of all that, you might even have inefficient business processes. So in all, the red numbers at the bottom reveal that just a few 100,000ths of the original fuel energy is actually delivering customer value. Where should we start fixing this? Downstream, start at the end. First, write elegantly terse code, optimally compiled, so at the goal that every compute cycle is a needed and wanted one. I had assumed this could save an order of magnitude in compute cycles, but recent tests suggest it's actually at least 2 orders of magnitude. And indeed, there's a new government study due out in less than a week saying they think it's upwards of 10 orders of magnitude. Wow. And then there's another, let's see, about 11 to 13, 11 to 18 more orders of magnitude and 3 other kinds of improvements. So there are some more here. For example, the next step is we can at least quadruple server efficiency, now even more. And the servers are going to need a lot less cooling and power supply. You can do both of those in smarter ways. And we could save even half the utility losses by using fuel cell trigeneration, cheaper than the uninterruptible power supplies it displaces. So if you multiply these savings from downstream to upstream, from right to left, you cut the total energy use by at least 2 orders of magnitude. Now, way more than that. 23 to 28 orders of magnitude is the latest estimate for AI data center, which this is not. This is a classical one. But in the old project for which we made this diagram in 2009, the client rejected most of our recommendations. So we were only able to triple efficiency at the same capital cost. But our partner EDS said if our recommendations they agreed with, which was about all of them, had all been adopted, we would have saved about 95% of the energy and half the capital cost. Now, even without most of the integrative design or many other innovations, U.S. electricity use, we found over a decade ago, could shrink 25% by 2050, despite all electric autos and a 2.6-fold bigger GDP. And we should have bought much more than this quadrupled electric end-use efficiency because the efficiency cost 10 times less than the electricity it saved. So we didn't buy nearly enough of it. And there are more layers of industrial efficiency. Heavy industry can use radically better processes like making ultra-pure iron electrochemically at the temperature of a cup of hot coffee. But also, smarter structural design and new business models can profitably save at least half the world's cement and steel that now release 15% of global CO2. Carefully speccing and applying the concrete can save another factor too. So together, saving 3/4 of the cement before you adopt lower carbon materials or production processes. Let me give you a few examples of this better structural design. Substituting tension for compression structures typically looks better, costs less, and uses 1/8 the tons. Pouring concrete into curvy fabric forms, not rigid prismatic forms, can often save over half the concrete by putting strength and stiffness only where you need them. And then the weight savings compound, they multiply because you need less strength to hold up less weight. An airy 3D printed bridge can carry mainly its users, while massive concrete bridges support mainly their own weight. By the way, here's a 3D printed stainless steel bridge. Most importantly, floor slabs like this total about half the total weight of a typical mid or high-rise building. And a 2-inch thick folded concrete floor slab like this, or a shallow vaulted dome, can replace a 12-inch thick flat slab, cost less, and save 3/4 of the cement and all the steel. Thin floor slabs and better energy design can then save a further 15% of core structural materials and 3/4 of the energy in a new mid or high-rise building like the Singapore one on the upper right, while increasing net rentable space by a stunning 55%. How? Well, designing out a vertical meter of mechanical plenum at the far left at each story fits 3 stories with a normal 9-foot 2-inch ceiling height into the current height of 2 stories. Cost, complexity, and time fall dramatically. Why would you build any other way once you see this? And cement is just the start. Our 1999 book with Paul Hawken, Natural Capitalism, found that the U.S. economy's flow of materials is over 99.9% pure waste, probably the biggest business bonanza on the planet. What about mobility? The world is buying nearly $1 trillion worth of electric vehicles this year, led by oil import-dependent Asia. Electrification roughly triples a car's efficiency, as we saw, but first improving the vehicle itself can cut by another 2 or 3-fold the energy needed to move that EV. You see, 2/3 of the energy it takes to move a car is caused by its weight. BMW showed how integrative design can lightweight a car at competitive cost. This i3 that I drive weighed about 660 pounds less than a normal metal one, but it made money from the first unit off the assembly line and then for $250,000 more. That's because its carbon fiber is paid for by the batteries that its lightness saves. And fewer batteries also mean faster recharging, less electricity and infrastructure and emissions and investment. The utilities think tank EPRI found that such savings from just doubling the efficiency of autos before you electrify them could save the U.S. $200 billion a year. Now, this car's integrative design snowballs weight savings much more than usually assumed. Its manufacturing is radically frugal, eliminating the 2 hardest and costliest steps in automaking. It's much better for workers, and the efficiency is quadrupled without compromise to the equivalent of 124 miles per gallon with many driver advantages. My favorite is the half normal turn radius. The next game changer could be 2 hypercars from little firms I've advised, both production ready. The first is heading for production in the next few quarters. It's an American carbon fiber 2-seat 3-wheeler that most drivers will not need to recharge. Or a Dutch team designed this metal 5-seat 4-wheeler, although it didn't get capitalized for production. Now, because both these designs are about 3-fold as efficient as a Tesla, their topside solar cells capture enough energy for ordinary daily driving without plugging in, bypassing the charging infrastructure and its electricity supplies. Pretty cool. But cars are just the start. Using the same automotive components, Tesla's battery electric heavy truck has been ramping up mass production since April. It can triple to sextuple the 18-wheeler diesel fleet's energy efficiency with great economics. Then there's this thoroughly flight-tested air taxi that could fly nonstop from Denver to London with 1/8 of the fuel use of a normal business jet. A mid-sized hydrogen model has been announced, plus importantly, a transonic business jet for 2030 service with doubled efficiency and doubled cabin size. The superlaminar aerodynamics in these planes can scale to probably the size of a 737 and could blow up aviation's business models. So sustainable aviation fuel, the industry's current focus, can be overtaken by all-electric aircraft. Ancient flying reptiles with tough but paper-thin bones had 10 or 11-meter wingspans, 3 times today's biggest birds. And now their fossils are inspiring fossil-free flight. 2 years ago, a quiet 5-passenger battery electric aircraft flew a roughly 600-pound payload for 386 statute miles, so say San Jose to San Diego. Using no runway, it takes off and lands vertically from a backyard or driveway or roof. In China today, uncrewed commercial versions are hauling nearly 1,800 pounds for 125 miles. And the world's top battery company plans an 8-ton version with nearly 1,900-mile range in the next year or two. Just a few days ago, Heart Aerospace, a Swedish firm, did its first test flight on a total 25,000-pound all-battery electric airplane with initial planned range 125 miles, or with hybrid propulsion initially, I think it's 400 or 500 miles. Now, most leading aerospace companies are working hard on electric aviation, and major airlines are planning to launch downtown-to-airfield electric aircraft service this year at prices they expect will fall to Uber premium levels for a car. But that's just the start, going well beyond the 3- to 5-fold efficiency gains that NASA has already found for efficient airplanes. How is that? Well, by efficiency revolution in aviation's 4 forces: lift, weight, drag, and thrust. The lift to drag ratio can be roughly tripled, at least doubled. Even light composite structures can be made featherweight by covering an airy cellular lattice of little plastic sticks with a tough polymer membrane. Propellers that fold in on themselves with no tips or spiral-like tulips can nearly eliminate turbulence and noise. Powered by ultralight motors and electronics. And if you need batteries or fuel cells, they too are getting several-fold lighter. But if you fly in daylight, as many missions do, you may need very little storage if you put ultralight solar cells on the aircraft's upper and lower surfaces. Remember, it gets nearly as much light reflected from below as from the sun above. That sun is about 20 or 25% stronger at altitude, and cold makes the cells more efficient. Airbus has already commercialized a solar aircraft that can stay aloft for months. Some military solar platforms stay up indefinitely. A solar aircraft took a pilot into the stratosphere a quarter century ago. Another has flown around the Earth. You can buy a 2-seat version today. Moreover, today's standard solar cells are about 23% efficient. The best are 37%. Optical antennas approaching 80 or 85% would not violate the laws of physics. Like the Aptera car you saw 3 slides ago, we could probably make an aircraft efficient enough to propel just with solar energy captured in daylight on its surfaces. Electric flight can have winning economics for 3 reasons. Electric planes cost less to buy as well as less to run. Electricity is about as much cheaper than fuel as batteries are heavier than fuel. And every decade after you buy a battery electric plane, you can probably upgrade its batteries to double its range and therefore quadruple its served cities. So it adds ever more value, unlike fuel planes, which only shed value with age. Put this whole story together, as I do in an annual Stanford lecture, and I suspect that my grandsons may be able to fly the Pacific on commercial solar-powered aircraft. Making that happen is a challenging opportunity that many industry leaders loved when I proposed it at 2 major aviation industry conferences 7 years ago. NASA says for over a decade, we've had the technology to create 3- to 5-fold more efficient airplanes if someone would make them and someone would buy them. Now we can see even later gains. And why should we take a century to do this incrementally when we can leapfrog straight to it? Major airplane buyers, even if they have the capital, are understandably risk averse. And airframe makers don't want to risk huge development investments for a radically better product that might not sell. So incrementalism continues as we squander fuel, money, carbon budget, and precious time. Climate won't wait, business as usual won't work, aviation's license to operate will erode. Our shareholders and voters and children will judge us negligent. But what if a powerful consortium of major customers, airlines, delivery and air logistics firms, the Pentagon, relieved the airframe makers' market risk so they could fully focus their skill and ambition? The buyers could collectively solicit a super efficient airplane by publishing very demanding specifications, very clean and at least quadrupled efficiency, and collectively commit to buy X copies a year for Y years at price Z from whoever first brings it to market, with a consolation prize for the runner-up. This would elicit and reward innovation for the airplanes they'll buy anyway. It's unbundling buying airplanes from buying innovation. And that changes the supplier's culture and brings out the best talent of their best innovators. I think that would yield a very different product slate, reducing risk to both parties, most of all to buyers. This golden carrot method has worked well since 1990 for over 20 diverse solicitations from Sweden to France, from America to India, and it's time we seriously considered it for airplanes. That could decouple flying from climate change. Unlike carbon offsets or SAF, it could also slash fuel costs and the risks of fuel price volatility. So in this teachable moment with oil so volatile, it could greatly increase energy security and national security. And it could unleash a huge burst of innovation that could transform aviation forever. What are we waiting for? Add up all these and many other savings, and the hydrocarbon reserves unsellable for competitive reasons look bigger than the reserves unburnable for climate reasons, putting owners even more at risk from market competition than from climate regulation. The cost of getting U.S. autos completely off oil fell from $18 per say barrel 15 years ago to zero for many autos today, and then even less over the next few years. Or to put it the other way around, for a gasoline car to compete with an electric car in China today, crude oil would have to fall below $15 a barrel. So oil became uncompetitive even at low prices before it became unavailable even at high prices. Now, methane gas is on this track too. I used to think gas markets would hold up for decades longer than oil, but now I think they're likelier to dwindle together with every gas market now under serious competitive threat, even as U.S. gas export policies threaten to create oversupply abroad and shortage at home. Competition with efficient use is especially keen. With fuels and electricity, technology and design are both moving efficiency into fast forward. Prior lighting improvements were largely swept away as LEDs in a decade got 30 times more efficient, 20 times brighter, 10 times cheaper. And ultimately, they'll save about an eighth of the world's electricity. What else changes this fast? Modern renewables. LEDs backwards are PVs, photovoltaics, turning light into electricity instead of the reverse. Solar and aqua wind power costs have plunged to or below the dashed lines, the cost of existing steam plants, fossil fuels, often making them uneconomic just to run. But the revolution goes much deeper. We're shifting from molecules and atoms to bits and packets, from hardware to software, from hierarchies to networks. Electricity is changing from centralized, supply-focused, fossil and uranium-fueled and brittle to distributed, customer-focused, renewable, and resilient. And its deepest change is how the information age informs, enables, and organizes customers to take power into their own hands. You know, it's wise to sell customers what they want before someone else does. Customers are figuring out they can buy a lot fewer electrons, use them more productively and timely, produce their own, and even trade them with each other. So Dutch customers can buy renewable electricity directly from other customers on this peer-to-peer website of Van de Bron, literally from the source. My friend bought his electricity from the guy in the upper left photo because the price was right. And it's a really cute piglet. And then he got a long handwritten Christmas card from his electricity supplier. What big utility could dream of such customer intimacy? Indeed, powerful disruptors are converging on the electricity industry from at least 8 directions. These 8 Pac-Men of the apocalypse move fast. They don't just add, they exponentiate. They're not lone wolves. They hunt in packs. They multiply quickly. and they could gobble up half of utility revenues in this decade. Together, they're creating an alien competitive landscape faster than most utility cultures can cope. 12 years ago, all central power plants were called dinosaurs. Too big, too inflexible, not even relevant for backup power in the long run. Who said that? It wasn't Greenpeace, it was Union Bank of Switzerland. And now a whole new wave of Pac-Man is coming over the hill. Solar power has now eclipsed every other kind of global generating capacity, largely because, like wind power, it's fundamentally both cheaper and faster than fossil or nuclear power. The International Energy Agency estimated that 96% of new solar and onshore wind power 3 years ago was cheaper than new coal or gas power, and that 3/4 built would beat existing fossil-fueled plants. Last year, Bloomberg estimated renewables won for 4/5 of total electric generation and beat just the cost of coal or gas in existing power plants in 1/4 of the global economy. And they also confirmed that the cheapest way to meet a flat load is now solar or wind plus backup, which can be demand side or storage or renewable or fueled or any combination. Costs remain about flat for fossil power, rising for nuclear, but they keep falling for renewables and especially for storage. Batteries now get more investment and add more capacity than nuclear, doubling every couple of years. Batteries convert solar power from when you have it to when you want it. So they've eliminated the supposed need for continuous power from thermal plants, fully meeting that supposed clean, firm need. This familiar Bloomberg history of levelized wholesale electricity costs, similar to IRENA's UN global database, shows why unsubsidized renewables win and keep pulling ahead. It's about feedback. Adding grid integration costs for all the technologies shown would generally widen the cost advantage to renewables. And that's because thermal plants tend to have bigger, longer, more abrupt, and far less predictable failures called forced outages than solar and wind power do. So fossil or nuclear plants need more and costlier backup for the same reliability. Now, to be sure, solar, wind, and storage totaling 1/4 more than the total generating capacity in the United States are stuck for an average of 5 years awaiting interconnections, or a decade awaiting approvals for a new transmission right of way. And over twice that much proposed capacities have been withdrawn. They got tired of waiting. But new power lines can often be displaced by efficiency, demand response, and distributed sources, or by advanced transmission wires. A new type of advanced transmission conductor from a company I used to advise can carry 2 or 3 times the current of traditional steel core aluminum conductors with half the losses, superior safety and reliability, and excellent economics. This novel conductor is an important way to decongest many regional grids, to expand renewables rapidly just by reconductoring existing towers, which is a normal maintenance task. And this can often avoid a new right-of-way with vastly lower risk, cost, and time. An older but less capable type of advanced conductor carrying only twice the current, not 3x or more, could nearly quadruple the U.S. transmission addable by 2035. And this could meet over 80% of the interzonal transmission needs to exceed 90% renewable electricity. The better new technology should avoid even more new transmission rights of way. So for bottlenecked renewables and congested grids, help is on the way. Now, renewables also scale up in a fundamentally different way. Traditionally, we built giant cathedral-like power plants, each costing billions, taking many years to license and build. But now, each year, with about the same capital, you can build a factory that produces each year thereafter enough solar cells to generate each year thereafter as much electricity as your cathedral ultimately will. That's why solar output worldwide is scaled faster than cell phones. Big, slow, complex power plants can't catch up. And over 90% of global and U.S. total net capacity additions are now renewable. And they can move incredibly quickly. For example, at the end of 2018, coal-dependent Vietnam had 0.1 gigawatts of solar power. 2 years later, 16.5 gigawatts. 9 of that was on 100,000 rooftops or similar structures, equivalent to building half the nation's coal plants in a year once the distribution grid catches up. And 72% of those additions were put in just in the month of December, mostly the last week of December, before a 9-month window closed for a juicy feed-in tariff. By 2023, Vietnam had over 21 gigawatts of renewables, nearly all privately financed. Those communists are impressive capitalists. Similarly, grassroots Pakistanis raised solar power from 3 to 22% of total electricity in 4 years through last year, saving over $18 billion in oil and gas imports and canceling 21 unneeded LNG cargoes. Pakistan was skeptical about renewables in 2019. Now they target 95% domestic clean electricity by 2040. And Bill McKibben reports that 4 or 5 solar panels and an inverter are becoming a common part of the dowry for Pakistani brides. Wow. China has a whole county rooftop solar program. They do decentralized auction and batch installation across the rooftops of a whole region at once. Rooftop solar wasn't a thing in China in 2017. 5 years later, it was 40% of total and 61% of new Chinese solar power, and 1 of every 4 solar panels in the world was on a Chinese rooftop. 3 years ago, globally, distributed solar was already getting as much investment as utility-scale solar. Both continue to soar, and in the U.S., rooftop solar has been cheaper than grid power since 2020, and Japan since 2014. All this means we do not need speculative, slow, and costly technologies like nuclear fusion and fission, except, of course, the well-engineered and appropriately sited free fusion reactor already thoughtfully provided. However, I'm glad that our neighborhood fusion reactor is 93 million miles away because it occasionally burps. And such solar flares will sooner or later destroy any unprotected power grid, as many still are. Against all these threats and more, our best protection is a portfolio of efficiently used, diverse, dispersed, renewable, resilient power sources, the right size for the task, especially put right on our roofs, not at the other end of a vast and brittle grid, and wired to work with or without the grid, as my house does. That resilient hookup should be our standard practice and a crucial element of national security. And all our filling stations should get solar power and batteries so we can fuel old-fashioned vehicles, even if the grid fails. Now, carbon-free power is necessary but not sufficient. We also need cheap and fast. We therefore need to count carbon and cost and speed. At actual markets and deployment speeds, new nuclear plants would save many-fold less carbon per dollar and per year than cheaper, faster efficiency or modern renewables. And the U.S. grid will already be decarbonized by then. Just operating, let alone further subsidizing existing nuclear plants, wastes money that could buy cheaper options, saving even more carbon. So the more urgent you think climate change is, the more vital it is to buy cheap, fast, proven solutions, not costly, slow, speculative ones. When someone tells you climate change is so urgent that we need all of the above, remember Peter Bradford's reply, the Dean of U.S. Utility Regulators. He said, "We're not picking and backing winners. They don't need it. We're picking and backing losers." That makes climate change worse. No proposed changes in size or technology or fuel cycle would change these conclusions. They are intrinsic to all nuclear technologies. And global nuclear power adds each year at most as much supply as renewables add about every day, maybe a few days. A climate non-solution is not worth paying for, let alone extra. So nuclear power has no business case and no operational need. It offers no benefits for grid reliability or resilience justifying special treatment. In fact, its inflexibility and ungraceful failures complicate modern grid operations. Mike Barnard just analyzed the natural experiment comparing nuclear with wind plus solar deployment in China, which is the world's biggest installer of both. And they have all the assets they need, but they scale very differently. Using local capacity factors, the nuclear capacity China added last year will produce only 2% as much electricity as the solar and wind capacity China added last year. So it helps, of course, that the wind and solar power is 2 or 3 times cheaper. But the important point is the wind and solar added 50 times more expected output than the nuclear additions did in the same year in a country where there's nothing holding them back. No wonder in the first half of this year, for the first time, less than half of China's electricity was coal-fired. And yet we are still told that only coal, gas, and nuclear plants can keep the lights on because they're 24/7, while wind and solar are variable and thus supposedly unreliable. But variable does not mean unpredictable. Here's how accurately the French grid operator in a stormy winter month a decade ago forecast a day ahead the actual output of the country's wind farms. They would do well to forecast demand that accurately. And forecasting has since improved so much that the Danish wind operators bid day-ahead wind power into the grid's hourly auction just as confidently as fossil fuel generators do, but a lot more profitably. Indeed, we built the grid because no generator is really 24/7. Giant plants fail too, losing a gigawatt in milliseconds, often abruptly and for weeks or more, even months, sometimes years. So grids manage this intermittence by backing up failed plants with working plants. And in exactly the same way, but often at lower cost, grids can manage the forecastable variations of solar and wind power by backing up those variable renewables with a portfolio of other renewables, all forecasted, integrated, and diversified by type and by location. So in hot and often humid Texas, with a 99% isolated grid and no big hydro, a 2050 summer week's expected loads can get much smaller and less peaky with profitably efficient use. Then we can make 86% of the annual electricity with wind plus solar cells and 14% from dispatchable renewables you can have whenever you want. This 100% renewable supply can then match the load by putting surplus electricity into 2 kinds of distributed storage that are worth buying anyway: ice storage, air conditioning, and smart bidirectional charging of electric autos, and then recovering that energy when needed and filling the last gaps with unobtrusively flexible demand. Then you have 100% renewable electricity every hour of the year with no bulk storage and with only about 5% left over to help decarbonize other sectors. So the economics should be excellent even at today's prices. And some grid operators are doing such choreography today. Scotland, in a recent whole year, was 176% renewable powered. Denmark, 92. Germany, I think just 60, 100% in a couple of northern states. Portugal, 76. Peninsular Spain, 63. And already they and some other European countries with modest or no hydropower are meeting half to 3/4 or more of their annual electricity needs from renewables. And yet they added no bulk storage and they have superior and rising reliability. Denmark and Germany have 5 times our reliability. So as Clay Stranger says, the operators have learned to run these grids the way a conductor leads a symphony orchestra. No instrument plays all the time, but the ensemble continuously creates beautiful music. South Australia makes its annual electricity already 3/4 for the past year by solar and wind. It expects 100% next year. Now 37 big companies want to build factories there. And renewables can do our hardest tasks more cheaply and reliably than fossil or nuclear. That's why solar and wind will chiefly power Australia's newest aluminum smelter and copper mine using renewable baseload contracts, while the iron region shifts to robotic solar field installation and self-lifting wind turbines that go up in a day. So this is 100% solar microgrid backed up by 800 used electric car battery packs wrapped in white tarps and stuck on cinder blocks while the panels lie on the ground. So it's powering modular data centers more cheaply and reliably than grid or nuclear power. This one was built in 4 months. It's now expanding another 7-fold. And using new batteries, Google just contracted for a version 200 times bigger, now being built in under 3 years. Nuclear plants average 10 years, And with their fuel cycles, they occupy 3 times more land per kilowatt hour than the solar plant does. Another interesting case is in Pueblo, Colorado, where local leaders are worried about losing tax revenues as a coal plant shuts down for economic reasons. and yet they're warming to a non-existent and exorbitant proposed nuclear plant. However, they might notice that they're already supporting 1,000 jobs with the over 90% solar-powered steel mill, the world's first almost all solar-powered steel mill, working fine. Now, despite such empirical examples, standard models say we need giant fossil or nuclear plants to keep the grid reliable as it gets renewable. And their error is leaving out most of the grid balancing solutions. The full competitive landscape includes 10 carbon-free ways, conceptually sketched here, to keep the grid in balance across all timescales, not just big batteries in magenta, and without needing fossil backup in red. Your actual costs will vary, but bulk storage comes last, not first. So we don't need to wait for a storage miracle, although some are emerging, and the market isn't waiting. Today's exponential battery growth could get global power over 60% of the way to net zero, and that's not the only option. The first 2 boxes on the left, megawatts and flexawatts, are several times bigger than had been thought, but cheaper. A lot of other options remain neglected. So giant batteries, currently the costliest option, are valuable, they are profitable, but they seldom look necessary. Long, calm, cloudy periods are often raised as another objection to renewables. But the 99.999% reliable German network, 50 Hertz, has analyzed Europe's Dunkelflaute, the dark doldrums, widely claimed to need months or seasons or even years of backup power. The actual need turns out to be only up to a week or 2 per year, totaling about 6% of winter electric use. And that could come just from existing gas-fired capacity, burning green molecules like hydrogen or ammonia, made at other times from surplus solar and wind. Therefore, the long-assumed need for massive long-duration storage was not found, partly because this study included 4 of our 10 grid balancing resources. My last 3 slides. Mindful markets are our most powerful tool for speeding the energy transformation, and markets can flip with breathtaking speed. On Fifth Avenue in New York City in 1900, you have to look hard for the first car. 13 years later, you have to look harder for the last horse. The horse and buggy industry thought it would have many decades to adapt, but Ford's Model T got 62% cheaper in 13 years. Car-owning households soared from 60% in a decade, 3/4 financed by a GM and DuPont innovation called car loans. Today, our solar modules just got 80% cheaper in 5 years. 3/4 of rooftop solar is innovatively financed. Batteries got over 95% cheaper since 2010. Ford's and Edison's industries are merging to eat Rockefeller's industry. So the pace of transformation is set not by incumbents, but by insurgents. They're not inhibited by incumbents' business models or legacy assets or cultures. Moreover, investors flee before customers do, because capital markets keenly sniff out disruption. And once they think you're in or even headed for the toaster, they don't wait for the toast to get done before they decapitalize you and invest in your successors. Already, trillions of dollars have prudently fled the fossil industries as they hemorrhage capital, talent, and clout. Before Putin's war, the world's top 16 listed hydrocarbon companies combined were worth less than Apple. All the world's significant automakers combined were worth less than Tesla. In the turbulence now supercharged by Trump's war, customers may bypass unloved suppliers, many regulators must play catch-up, pre-stranded assets will abound, and business as usual will become the riskiest thing you can do. One more thought. The energy transformation I've summarized here is not just fundamental, it is elemental. The first industrial revolution was the age of carbon, creating our prosperity and the world's mightiest industries from coal and oil and gas. But now that obsolete age of carbon is giving way to the modern age of silicon. Silicon microchips, telecom, software turn people from isolated to network, systems from dumb to smart, grids from analog to digital, and potentially from dirigiste to democratized. Silicon power electronics make electricity interconvertible and precisely applicable, replacing fiery molecules with obedient electrons. And silicon solar cells enable the ascent of energy from mining the fires of hell to harvesting the breath and radiance of heaven. Our responsibility and our opportunity is to help enable the new energy system, not protect the old one, to build back better, to move fast and fix things, so the global energy transformation can move at the cost and space and the pace of design and software, not of infrastructure, and can be not constrained by the inertia of incumbents, but sped by the ambition of insurgents, like many of you. Thank you for your kind attention, and I'm eager to hear what's on your minds.